Hello, everyone. I am super excited that you are here with me, either on the live or in the recording. And today is Wednesday, March 4th, our first Wednesday in March, and it is the week of the full moon, so you may be feeling some pretty strong energies since yesterday's lunar eclipse. So, and with that, the lunar eclipse was and is inviting us into this space to, deeply release a part of our identity that we are no longer willing to carry with us. And so with that in mind, today we're going to be focusing on pride. So let's breathe into that space. Just inviting you to come to the edge of your seat. And even as I say the word pride, notice what happens to your body. And I'm just inviting you to be present with that word, with the thought that comes up, with the tension that comes up, with the overall feeling or contraction, whatever you may be experiencing. Breathe into that space. And as you breathe into that space, inviting you to release the self-judgment, release the self-expectation, and invite in allowance. Bring intention to your breath. Eyes can be relaxed down and focused inward, or in a comfortable position of your choice. And allowing yourself to let the belly rise on the inhale and let the belly fall on the exhale. As you connect with your intention, can you invite in allowance? Consciously inhaling through the nose and consciously sighing out through the mouth to the sound of a S or a sh. Like sh. Inhaling and exhaling. One more time. After that last exhale, allowing yourself to return to a natural cadence. And inviting you back into our shared space. If your eyes are closed, fluttering them open gently. Maybe rolling the shoulders or moving the upper body in any way that feels nourishing. Hello. All right. So I want to read you a quote by C.S. Lewis. And it says, yes, pride is a perpetual nagging temptation. Keep on knocking on it on the head, but don't be too worried about it. As long as one knows one is proud, one is safe from the worst form of pride. So oftentimes, maybe what you felt in your body was the pride that gets this negative connotation. Okay, and so today we're going to unpack the difference between authentic pride and false pride, so that we can kind of come into perhaps a different relationship with it. So maybe authentic pride is even a new concept to you. So let's start by defining what that is. So authentic pride is a term used in psychology, and it is known as healthy pride. So authentic pride is grounded in effort, growth, and contribution. Based on research from the field of psychology, authentic pride is associated with perseverance, leadership effectiveness, emotional regulation, resilience. Who here is finding this to be new information? Different when the felt sensation that you experience in your body, right? Oftentimes pride is associated not in this way, right? We don't really talk about pride in this space. And so we're talking about it here, all right? And with authentic pride, there is this belief that I worked hard and I grew, right? Rather than being tied to identity protection, which is often the relationship that we have around the word pride, authentic pride is tied to process and mastery. And therefore, it's associated with humility and gratitude, openness to feedback, and even a willingness to learn. On a very deep level, we get to actually see the higher attributes of self-esteem that are stabilized rather than fragile. So this might be a new concept for you. So what does authentic pride sound like, right? It sounds like, I'm proud of the work I did, right? Acknowledging yourself. Not comparing yourself to somebody else, right? Acknowledging yourself for your own self. I'm proud of how much I've grown, right? Comparing yourself to your past version of self. Or it might sound like, that was hard, and I stayed the course. Acknowledging your commitment, your effort, right? Your own willingness to learn. So, from a neuroscience perspective, authentic pride shows up in the reward circuitry of the brain. Isn't that phenomenal? So we're talking about the ventral stratum and the medial prefrontal cortex, all right? And so let's kind of dive into that science a bit, just so you've got a little bit more reference to where that is in the brain and what those parts of the brain actually do for us. And so we've kind of got like the amygdala here, and then we've got this space of the brain that kind of surrounds the amygdala, okay? And then we have this larger white space of the brain. And this is where, in this larger white space, is like the prefrontal cortex and other major big parts of the brain, right? As far as space is concerned. This ventral stratum is one of the primary emotional centers for emotional regulation, similar to the amygdala, actually, right? It responds more, though, to positive stimuli rather than negative or neutral stimuli. And so that's pretty fascinating. That authentic pride actually shows up in a space of reward and motivation and is registered in that way in the brain, right? And as far as the medial prefrontal cortex is concerned, right, this is the space of self-reflection and meaning. And so this is like space behind our forehead, right? And so these regions of the brain in general reinforce connection to effort and mastery. And thereby we are strengthening our relationship with learning and motivation. From an energetic perspective, then, authentic pride shows up as grounded confidence, calm leadership, not suppressed anger, resentment, I'm not articulating my truth leadership, but genuinely nervous system regulated, calm leadership. It also shows up as generosity, a willingness to share credit, an openness to help. Authentic pride actually strengthens the connection with others. Anybody else here kind of blown away by that reality? Because what is generally thought of is false pride. And in psychology, the term that's actually used is hubristic pride. And this is the pride that's based on identity, protection, and superiority, right? So instead of coming from the energy of effort and growth, it comes from this belief that I am better than others. And if we actually dig a little bit deeper, what's really going on is an attachment to identity. I must maintain the image that I am competent, that I am invaluable, that I am untouchable, that I am superior, that I am better than, right? And so in this usage and experience of pride, this is where we get narcissism, aggression, defensiveness, shame and avoidance, and it's actually reflective of a very fragile self-esteem. When we're in false pride, we might say things like, well, I'm naturally better at this. Oh, they just don't understand. I shouldn't have asked for help. And when we're in this state of pride, when we're experiencing this emotional state, this is very unstable. And our ego here requires constant reinforcement. So where does false pride live in the brain? Well, interestingly enough, false pride lives in the amygdala, the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex, also known as the ACC, and as well as in our defense self-evaluation networks. All right, so we know that the amygdala is that almond-shaped part of our brain that's equally represented on the left and the right hemispheres of the brain, right? And we know that it operates as our fear center. So just take a notice to evaluate this, and this is what's been proven in research, right? So significantly different parts of the brain are being activated when we are in false pride. Okay, so the dorsal ACC, this is the part of the brain that handles conflict monitoring. Okay, and so when we experience cognitive dissonance, for example, this is the part of the brain that would help resolve that conflict. And this third part that's getting activated, right, is the defense self-evaluation networks. And so these are neural networks that monitor, protect, and maintain a positive self-concept. So when we're in false pride, we're in protection mode, right? We are filtering out, defending against comments that negate the our own individual self-concepts. So when I started, I shared that we just had a lunar eclipse yesterday, right? And that the invitation and that energy is for us to let go a part of our identity. What is something that you maybe have carried for a while that actually no longer serves the person that you are becoming? This is what we call a threshold moment, right? This is the membrane where we're bumping up against it, right? It's not because you're incapable or you just love self-sabotaging yourself. No, it's a nervous system safety response. Please hear that. because the brain is interpreting these attacks against identity, it becomes reactive to people criticizing it, right? It becomes reactive to you making mistakes, being perceived, or having the perception of being disrespected, right? A loss of status. This is why anger is often a byproduct of pride. So, what's happening in the brain then, right? In general, the ACC is underactivated for many people that experience depression or anxiety, experience PTSD. And what has happened is that the amygdala has been overfiring, right? And so the brain kind of starts to mute the signals. Right? Cortisol has been flooding. We've talked about the HPA axis, right? Cortisol has been flooding the system. And so generally what's happening is that the brain is not in a online positive state. So it's very difficult to regulate emotions, to stay present, and therefore we get defensive, right? Our safety is threatened. That's the perception. And so the goal here is that when we release the false pride beliefs, then we can reduce activation of the amygdala. We can start to connect more deeply with helpful thoughts, and we can have an non-detached relationship with painful emotions, right? So just kind of to put this in a simple breakdown, when we're in authentic pride, our efforts are based around growth. When we're in false pride, we're in identity protection mode. Authentic pride, we have a stable sense of self-worth. False pride, we're very fragile with our self-worth. Authentic pride, we're open to learning. False pride, defensive. Authentic pride, we're open and allow vulnerability. False pride, we actually avoid vulnerability. Authentic pride strengthens connections between ourselves and others and the divine. False pride, we isolate. Authentic pride, we acknowledge that we have limitations, and we welcome support in learning more and overcoming our limitations. False pride, we're proving what we know. We deny our limitations, and we handle everything. So we actually reject help. when we're in false pride, we end up having a chain reaction, right? Identity must be protected. Protection requires attachment. Attachment to a concept, a thought, a belief, right? Attachment creates then the space for fear of loss. So now we've shifted out of the space of love into a space of fear. Fear creates defensiveness, right? Because we have the perception that we can be attacked. Therefore, we need to be protected. Defensiveness creates anger. And sometimes that anger then is suppressed, or it's projected outwards through judgment. But either way, this sense of loss creates grief and puts us in a state of collapse. So I want to invite you in to a practice. And it's a concept called beginner's mind. It's a Zen practice, and a beginner's mind is the idea that we approach every moment without the burden of identity. So, every moment, no matter how much training or how little training we have, instead of approaching the topic of or the response to a topic that you're familiar with, oh, I already know. The beginner's mind says, I'm willing to see this with fresh eyes. I'm open to receiving something new. And what this does psychologically is that it activates cognitive flexibility. And so we're activating our prefrontal cortex. And then by doing so, we allow in for curiosity, for learning, for adaptability, and for humility. Whereas false pride says, I must defend what I know. The beginner's mind says, I can learn something new. And what this does is dissolve rigidity. So, let's bring this down to earth a little bit. Okay? And I want you to think about a situation for yourself. Where are you attached to who you are? For example, I am a person of high integrity. I hold high standards. I can do anything. I should be able to do this. If I ask for help, people will think I'm weak. I am more than capable of doing this all by myself. What comes up for you? Where do you feel it in your body? just take a moment to notice. And what would shift if you were willing to see that original thought with new eyes? What releases in your body? Oftentimes, false pride can lead to burnout, resentment, isolation, and either a suppressed anger towards others, therefore an anger directed towards self because we're not speaking our truth, because we're seeing somebody else's actions as an attack on us. So how can you strengthen your leadership? In your own life? What identity, what aspect of an old identity are you willing to let go of? When we're in a state of authentic pride, we celebrate growth. Growth in ourselves, growth in those around us. But when we're in a state of false pride, we're really in a state of fear. And if we're in that state of fear, then I invite you to look at the thought that you wrote down initially. And can you forgive yourself for that thought? Are you willing to see that thought differently? Are you willing to see that that thought separates you from the divine, separates you from your wholeness, separates you from being able to connect with your whole self or with love, unconditional love? I'd love to know what comes up for you, and I am here to work through anything that does come up for you. So please share your thoughts in the community, and I look forward to being of support in this way. I also want to let you know that there's so much more here to dive into, and so I will be doing a workshop on pride, and in that workshop we'll be talking about how to use the map of consciousness and going into some very specific tools that will help us rewire our brain and rewire our relationship with this concept of pride, and help us create a new brick in our yellow brick road, right? And wanting to remind you that the yellow brick road isn't about getting somewhere. It's about remembering who we are, one honest step at a time. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really look forward to hearing about your growth and your awareness and supporting you on your journey. Thanks so much. Take care.